I get the opportunity to check out a lot of different gear because of the channel, and I've really enjoyed my time getting to know the Arturia Audio 16 rig. The 16 rig is a fantastic interface, but is it right for everyone? Well, we're going to find out today, aren't we? I've been testing the unit now for the last 6 to 8 weeks. I've used it on various projects, including a few product reviews. Now, in a perfect world, you never have to concern yourself with issues associated with your interface, right? Well, many of us have bought interfaces only to find that they were wrought with issues, from drivers and crashes to the vendor not keeping up with bug fixes and updates. I can tell you that the 16 rig has been none of those things for me while I've been testing it. It has been a flawless experience so far without a single issue that I can think of. Let's get into some of the key points to help you decide, is this right for you or not? Up first, let's talk about the build quality. The housing, the knobs, the I/O jacks, all the connecting spots within the unit feel solid and well made. The interface has some girth to it and it feels solidly manufactured. From my time with the 16 rig, it feels like a solidly built interface designed for many years of daily use. Now let's go over the front and rear of the 16 rig, starting with the analog I/O. As we go across the front of the 16 rig, you'll notice that there are inputs and outputs on the front of the unit. Note that the analog I/O on the front of the unit mirrors corresponding analog I/O on the rear. However, when a connection is made on the front, the Control Center app, more on that in a bit, recognizes if something has been plugged in and bypasses the corresponding I/O connection on the rear of the 16 rig. Now that you know this, let's dive into examples of how you might utilize the connections of the front versus the rear. Let's start with outputs 3 and 4. For me, the most common use for these outputs would be either reamp through external hardware like a guitar amp, tabletop gear like pedal effects, or other things where it is simply easier to connect to the front rather than the rear. I tried it out for guitar reamping as well as processing through some external desktop hardware, and it worked as expected. Now let's get on to inputs 1 and 2 combi jacks. A combi jack includes an XLR or a 1/4 inch balanced. If you need more than 2 XLR inputs, then this is not likely to be the interface for you. For a lot of folks, 2 is sufficient. However, if you do need any additional mic preamps for the recording session, you would need to use external mic preamps that are either connected via the analog inputs or via ADAT digital I/O. Think tracking drums or a small band. If you plug in a TRS cable into the combi jack, the mic preamp will be bypassed automatically. This is not a feature of some other interfaces. A footnote, the 16 rig automatically knows when you're using either XLR or line and will automatically make the input type changes for you within the app. For DIs like bass or guitar, you'd use line input 1 and 2. Now let's talk about inputs 3 and 4. The decision to use 1/4 inch mini stereo jack is a curious one. They suggest that it's great for streaming audio from a mobile device, but in my experience, it seems like manufacturers are moving away from physically connected headphones, opting to use Bluetooth headphones instead. Also, I'd rather have it been dual TRS. Yeah, I know it's a minor gripe. That said, your workflow may be much different than mine, and you may find tons of practical uses for it. The way I'd use inputs 3 and 4 from the front would be connect non-mounted outboard gear. This is something I personally do frequently here in my studio. Now you can access the majority of settings from the front panel, which is quite intuitive, or even better, use the Control Center app for your computer where you can do so much more. There are many great videos on Arturia Audio's website that do a very good job of demonstrating how it works and the power of it. In the monitor section, you can also set up the speaker icon button to switch between mono, dim, and then AV your monitors if you're using more than one set of monitors. Each one is colored separately so you know visually which one you have selected. The AB is only applicable if you're using multi-monitor in your studio. You can set that up in Control Center. Lastly, on the front, you'll see 2 USB connections. Hub is what you'd expect. Plug in a thumb drive or any other USB device that you want your computer to recognize, and it'll recognize it. MIDI USB is to connect a MIDI controller for your MIDI devices that don't have a 5-pin port and connect only via USB. This way, when using the 16 rig in standalone mix mode, You can use MIDI gear that requires MIDI without being connected to your computer. Pretty cool for you keyboard players out there. So now's the time I'm going to do my shameless plug. I've got a relationship with both Sweetwater and Tommen, so if you ever need to buy any gear or anything, I'll get a small commission off of that because I'm part of their affiliate program. This way, they have no say-so or input whatsoever on what I say or how I say it, but when I want gear sent to me, they will send it to me to be able to demonstrate to all of you. There is a link to those down in the description below. All I do is ask that you do it. It's really what keeps this YouTube channel going, as you don't really make any money whatsoever off views, and that's the way you can help me keep this content going. Now let's focus on the rear. We have line inputs 1 through 16 TRS that can handle plus 24 dBu with the pad switch on and plus 12 dBu with the pad off. And here we have outputs 3 through 10 and 1 and 2 for your main monitor outputs. Outputs 3 through 10 are DC coupled. Next up, we're going to talk about digital I/O. Up to 16 channels of I/O via ADAT at 44.1 or 48, and 8 channels of I/O at 96 and above. Missing from the unit, SPDIF and AES. I have seen far too many interface manufacturers doing away with SPDIF, and I feel it's a huge mistake and a deal breaker for someone like me. I strongly recommend that they add SPDIF to any future versions of this unit. AES is not something I ever use, so that's not important to me personally. It may be to you. Lastly, you have BNC for word clock to keep various pieces of gear clocked to a single source. Then next, MIDI I/O through additional USB hub location, as well as your USB connection to interface with your computer. So as you can see, you have a lot of I/O on this unit. If you need more, you can add additional 16 rigs to expand or work with ADAT for expansion. Most of you, your big question is going to be conversion. And I can tell you that this is on par with my Ferrofish Pulse 16, which would arguably be a direct competitor in price as well as quantity of I/O. Good conversion as far as I'm concerned. Latency, all I can say is I had no issues running large sessions at a buffer 64. Now, a lot of that has to do with the power of the computer, so users' mileage may vary by computer and experience with buffer management. Let's talk about the flexibility of this unit. In addition to plenty of analog and digital I/O, the true flexibility of the 16 rig lies in its extremely powerful Control Center app. You do all of your routing, I/O setup, Q mixes, and no latency mixes via that. The 16 rig comes in the ability to route any analog or digital input or output to as many other inputs and outputs as you wish. It's very similar in the way it works in concept to RME's Total Mix, but much, much, much easier to understand. Think internal patch bay where you can route all of your inputs and outputs to any I/O you wish. You will be amazed at the ways you will want to use this feature. I know I certainly used it a lot, both on the 16 rig as well as via Total Mix on my interface. Until you experience this kind of flexibility, it's hard to fully comprehend all the possibilities. I highly encourage you to watch how-to videos on Arturia's website. They do a very good job of explaining everything that you need to know. Who are its main competitors? In my opinion, it's the Motu 16A and the Ferrofish Pulse 16. I have a Ferrofish Pulse 16 that I use alongside my interface via MADI. As a comparison to the Ferrofish Pulse 16, the conversion is on par as mentioned previously. I couldn't tell the difference audibly with one unit over the other. As much as I love my Pulse 16, it does not have all the options for me to rely on it as my only interface. Where the Pulse 16 makes sense would be to connect it to the 16 rig via ADAT, where you can add a ton more analog and digital I/O. So who's the 16 rig for? Well, they market the unit as a great interface for people who have outboard sense and things like that, where I/O is line level. In this situation, you really only need analog inputs and not as many outputs. I agree that the 16 rig is an outstanding option for those that need that in their studio. That said, I'll add the way I would want to incorporate it. I would use inputs and outputs 3 through 8 for external hardware to be used as hardware inserts. Inputs 9 through 16 would be used for my various outboard mic preamps. If I wanted to add additional I/O for more external power, I'd pair it with a Pulse 16. So to sum it up, this is a feature-rich and extremely flexible recording interface with a lot of analog and digital I/O. Not everyone needs that much I/O, but if you do, you should be looking hard at the 16 rig if the features and flexibility in I/O meet your needs. If it does, then I highly recommend considering the 16 rig. Thanks for watching the video, and as always, don't forget to leave any comments down below. Please subscribe and hit that notification bell. Until next time, have a great day. Bye-bye.